Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SVOG webinar overviewing the grant closeout process. It's 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to give everyone just another minute to log in and get settled, and then we'll begin the presentation. Okay, seems like we have the majority of people on, and not too many are coming on new. So we can get started. Hello, my name is Tara Bartlett. I'll be moderating today's webinar, What to Expect During the Grant Closeout. And to kick us off, I am proud to introduce Acting Deputy Director, Catherine Cox.
Thank you, Tara, and good afternoon, Shuttered Venue Operator Grantees. My name is Catherine Cox, and as Tara mentioned, I am the Acting Deputy Director of the SVOG program. Along with our director, Allison Richards, and our team, I am pleased to welcome you today to our webinar on closeout requirements. Closeout is the third part of our MAC series, and of course, MAC being monitoring, auditing, and closeout. Closeout is an important part of the grant lifecycle that takes place once all grant funds are expended or the budget period for an SVOG award has ended. Every grantee will go through closeout, and the timing depends on your budget period as listed on your notice of award. We do anticipate that over the next 6 months, over 3,000 of you will be ready for closeout. So we hope that you find today's webinar informative and a useful resource as you prepare for grant closeout. We thank you for all you do to support the arts across the country, and we look forward to continuing to partner with you through the SVOG program. With that, I will turn it back to Tara Bartlett to kick off the webinar.
Thank you so much, Catherine. So today I'll be going over some meeting logistics. If we can advance to the next slide, thank you so much. Today's meeting will be in listen-only mode. The meeting will be recorded. We do encourage anyone on the line to ask questions during the presentation using the Q&A chat feature. Questions will be reviewed by staff that we have on the presentation, and we'll also be covering them during Q&A portions of the presentation. Any questions that do not pertain to SVOG closeout or questions that may be very specific to your particular grant should be sent to your grant management specialist. For today's presentation, we will be prioritizing questions about closeout and some of the monitoring recap notes that we'll be getting into shortly. If you've not been in touch with your grant management specialist, please note that they are now listed in your grantee portal. If you have any issues contacting with your grant management specialist, you can email your questions to svogrant@sba.gov. For today's presentation, when you're submitting questions, please note that if you are signed in anonymously, it is very important that you include your grant application number if you have any specific questions. Also, please do reply to any previous questions that you had submitted instead of starting a new thread so that we can track what you're saying and respond to all of your comments. Next slide, please. Thank you. During this webinar, we'll provide an overview of the closeout process. We'll discuss how to prepare for closeout, the closeout notification, and any required actions. We'll then break for a Q&A. We will also provide some examples of required documentation that may be requested and discuss other closeout actions. Lastly, we'll hold some Q&A question time for the end. So, are you in the right place? This webinar is applicable for the entire SVOG grant universe. So if you have received a Shuttered Venue Operators grant, please do stay on the line. All federal grants include closeout, so SVOG grantees should be prepared to submit their closeout steps. Before we go into closeout, we're going to bring Leah on the line for a monitoring webinar recap to go over some highlights from our last monitoring webinar, as well as some follow-up questions that we received during the webinar presentation. Leah?
Thank you, Tara. Good morning. My name is Leah Southers. I'm a principal with Williams Adley. On August 4th, 2022, we gave a technical assistance webinar about what to expect during a monitoring event. We received a lot of great questions during the webinar and would like to take a few minutes to provide a quick recap of some high-level points covered at that webinar. We'll also answer a couple common questions that we received. After the short recap, I'll turn it over to Rochelle to discuss the closeout process. First, I'll discuss what is a cost compliance monitoring event. Monitoring is an SBA-led review of a grantee's expenditures to ensure that costs are used for allowable purposes. Active grantees may be randomly selected to participate in a cost compliance monitoring event, and others may be selected based on other factors identified by SBA. Please note, your status in your portal may say in monitoring, but that does not necessarily mean you've been selected for a monitoring event. If you've been selected for monitoring, you'll receive a notification in the portal with instructions and next steps. Next slide. Next, we'll give a high-level recap of the monitoring process and milestones. The monitoring process is comprised of 3 action items. First, a grant notification and an initial document request is issued through the grantee portal. The document request will indicate the cost categories under review and the documents requested. The grantee should upload the requested documents to the portal, and the grant monitor will review the submitted documentation. Next, the grant monitor issues a monitoring report to request supporting documentation for selected transactions. The grantee will upload supporting documentation to the grantee portal. Please review the webinar recording for examples of documentation that may be requested and provided. Finally, the grant monitor reviews the uploaded documentation and issues a report through the grantee portal. It will indicate whether, based on the grantee's review, corrective actions are needed. If no corrective action is needed, the grantee only needs to acknowledge receipt of the report. If corrective action is needed, the grantee will be asked to upload additional documentation. The grantee should not close out the grant until the monitoring event is closed. Next slide. We received a few questions about the difference between monitoring, auditing, and closeout. Each of these is a separate process within the grant lifecycle. One of the major differences is that audits and monitoring events will only be required of certain grantees, either if you meet the threshold for an audit or if you are selected by SBA for monitoring. Closeout is a process that all grantees will go through. In addition, both monitoring and closeout is performed by an SBA team member, while your audit is performed by a financial professional. Next slide. During the last webinar, we received several questions about documentation that we will answer here. First, do all receipts invoices and other support for selected cost categories need to be provided? The answer is no. SBA will select a sample of transactions and provide it to you as part of the second request. You should upload supporting documentation for the sample transactions only. Next question we've received is, what should the grantee provide if they don't have policies and procedures? If you don't have policies and procedures related to a specific cost category, please upload a short narrative describing your organization's processes related to initiating, approving, and processing transactions related to the selected cost category. Similarly, if there are gaps in any of the documentation requested, not just policies and procedures, please include a narrative explanation. Remember that if we don't find the submission was sufficient, we'll request additional documentation. Please put your best foot forward. Next slide. So that's the recap on monitoring. I will hand it over to Rochelle Cottingham to discuss closeout.
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon. My name is Rochelle Cottingham. I am a senior manager at Cone Resnick. As previously mentioned, all SVOG grantees should be prepared to complete closeout requirements. Now we'll start off by talking about how to prepare for closeout. The finalized budget action item allows grantees to update their budgets to reflect their finalized award amount and/or update allocations to allowable cost categories to align with actual or projected use of funds to date. Grantees do not need to request SBA approval to move costs between allowable cost categories, and all grantees must complete the finalized budget action item. As noted from the slide, some of the items that can be accomplished are grantees can let SBA know what to expect from spending records at closeout. That again gives you a chance to revise your budget, reallocate expenditures, and in addition to notifying SBA if you won't be able to expend the entire award. It should be noted that unspent award funds will need to be returned during the closeout action item. Next slide, please. In order to prepare for closeout, be sure to maintain and organize all records related to your SVOG award. These actions include assembling supporting documentation, reviewing expenditure tracking to ensure costs are properly documented, organizing expenditures by budget category, updating property inventory records if that applies, and if property disposition is required, submitting a property disposition request to SBA for disposition instructions. And this request can be submitted through the action item. The grantee should also confirm whether the award has been fully expended or if funds should be refunded to SBA. Some helpful resources include how to prepare for your final budget video, the post-award FAQ, the active grantee and closeout info session, and as always, please be reminded that you can feel free to reach out to your GMS for any guidance. Next slide, please. Some considerations to be mindful of to assist in completing the expense report action item. Please note that SBA is developing a checklist that outlines these items to assist grantees with the closeout process. The program will notify grantees once the closeout checklist is available. The checklist will cover the preparation activities noted in the previous slide, in addition to providing other guidance that we will move into next. Next slide, please. Additional guidance includes determining whether expenditures are properly categorized and whether you should reallocate expenditures across budget categories to reflect final allocations. Note that prior approval is not required for reallocation of funds among direct cost categories. Grantees are also reminded to confirm whether the costs were incurred within the allowable period, which runs from March 1st, 2020 to December 31st, 2021, or June 30th, 2022, if a supplemental award was received. If costs were incurred outside of the allowable period, grantees are required to make the necessary corrections. Next slide, please. Finally, you should confirm that the sum of expenditures equals your expenditure tracking. If the full award amount was not expended, you should request repayment instructions from SBA. As noted previously, if disposition of equipment or unused supplies is required, you should request disposition instructions from SBA. We'll now move into the closeout process overview. As previously mentioned, all SVOG grantees should be prepared to close out their grant. We'll start with what is closeout. First, closeout is the process that takes place once all funds are expended or the project period for your SVOG grant has ended. The purpose of closeout is to ensure that final documentation is submitted, allowable costs are determined, required documents are uploaded, amounts due to the federal government are determined, and required funds are repaid if that applies. Next slide, please. What is the SVOG award closeout process? The SVOG award process has 3 steps: the begin closeout expense report action item, the complete closeout SF425 action item, and SBA's notification to the grantee that the award has been closed. The closeout timeline is comprised of 3 action items. First, the grantee receives a begin closeout expense report action item notification in the grantee portal. Upon expending all funds or reaching the budget period end date, the grantee prepares to close out and submits final reporting. Grantees have 120 days from the end of the grant term to initiate closeout. The expense report action item is only available once the final budget has been approved. The expense report action item will remain available until the grantee chooses to respond to it. Grantees should not respond to the expense report action item until they are ready to close out their award. The guidance to pursue timely closeout is articulated in the Notice of Award Addendum and SVOG Program FAQ document. Upon approval of the expense report action item by the SBA, the grantee receives the SF425 notification. The grantee must complete the SF425 action item within 30 days. Upon completion of grantee closeout, as previously stated, SBA will send a letter notifying the grantee that closeout actions are complete and reminding the grantee of document retention requirements. The notification will be sent to the email address on file. What are barriers to closeout? SBA cannot complete grant award closeout if any of the following conditions are present. You have an open monitoring event, there are unresolved audit issues, or unresolved questions or issues requiring additional response or action from the grantee. A few are noted here, include grantee change of ownership, failure to respond to an action item, or a grantee failure to repay unused grant funds. The expense report action item. We'll use these next few slides to address this action item. Grantees will receive the expense report action item notification after approval of the finalized budget action item. As a reminder, closeout is initiated when 1, award funds are fully spent, or 2, when the grant term or budget period has ended. Grantees have 120 days from the end of the budget period to initiate closeout. The expense report action item is the first step in the closeout process and allows grantees to complete the SVOG expense report, confirm SVOG policy compliance, confirm SVOG property compliance, and attest and submit the action item for approval. First step in the process is to read the instructions and select the checkbox to confirm that you have spent all of the SVOG funds you plan to spend and are ready for closeout. You will not be authorized to spend additional SVOG funds once you submit the action item, and all unspent funds must be returned to SBA. The expense report action item is the final accounting of SVOG award expenditures and documents your actual spending against the grant. Expense reports must be submitted through the portal or as otherwise directed by the program. This action item becomes available once the finalized budget action item is approved. Expense report actions may include the following. Grantees should enter expenditure totals into the actual SVOG expenses column, which is in circles in the far right, for each allowable budget category based on actual expenditure tracking. And again, prior approval is not required for the in-scope transfer or reallocation of funds among direct cost categories in the approved budget, total budget. Next slide, please. You should double check data entry and the sum of all expenditures recorded to make sure the sum in the portal is equal to the total expenditure amount based on your expenditure tracking. If the amount expended is less than the amount awarded, unspent funds must be paid back to the SBA through pay.gov. The system will return a warning, the portal will return a warning message if actual expenses are less than the award amount. You must acknowledge the amount of any unspent funds before proceeding. There are 3 potential warning messages you may come across while completing your expense report action item. 1, your total SVOG expenses cannot exceed the award amount. Please review your entries to revise accordingly if this occurs. This indicates that your expense report is higher than your final budget. In order to resolve this message, you have to reduce the sum of all of your expenses so that it doesn't exceed your award amount. The second error message is related to the opposite scenario. Your total actual SVOG expenses are less than your total budget. This scenario means that you have not spent your entire SVOG grant amount. In this case, the SBA will contact you to return any unspent funds. If you receive this message, you can go back and review and correct your allocations to make sure that everything is correct. If you have, in fact, underspent your award amount and wish to return funding, you'll have to check the acknowledgement checkbox confirming that you have unspent SVOG award funds. This will allow you to advance to the next stage. Be sure you don't have any additional eligible costs that you can include in your expense report before doing so. The final message is your total advertising, production, transportation, and capital expenditures cannot exceed 50% of the total direct charges. To resolve this message, you will need to go back and review the expenditures for those 3 budget categories to reallocate funds so that they do not exceed 50% of the total SVOG award amount. You will not be able to move forward with the expense report unless these messages are cleared. SVOG policy compliance. Next, you will need to confirm policy compliance. This step allows grantees to confirm compliance with expenditure and audit requirements. The grantee must confirm compliance with each item before proceeding. If a grantee purchased personal property or equipment, some property may need to be inventoried at closeout. Personal property equipment purchased with SVOG funds should be inventoried if the personal property equipment has a per unit market value of more than $5,000 at the time of closeout, or unused supplies have an aggregate value of more than $5,000. Helpful resources include the post-award FAQ. If equipment was purchased with SVOG funds, grantees should have maintained an accurate record of these purchases. Equipment inventory records include description of the property, the serial number, who holds title, the acquisition date and cost of the property, the location, use, and condition of the property, and any ultimate disposition data, including the date of disposal and sale price of the property. See 2 CFR 200-313 for more information. A sample template is available from your GMS upon request. The next step in the expense report process is to confirm compliance with SVOG property requirements. You'll need to acknowledge that guidance was provided within the forms that details requirements to maintain property records. Next, if grant funds were used to purchase equipment with a current per unit value over $5,000, you must affirm that you will comply with the listed requirements applicable to that equipment. Although the parameters of SVOG program make it unlikely to occur if your specific circumstances or at the end of the 120-day period require you to initiate closeout while still possessing unused supplies with an aggregate value over $5,000, you must also affirm compliance. If equipment or supplies were not purchased or do not meet the threshold requirements, the grantee should answer no to this affirmation. Finally, the grantee will need to affirm to requesting disposition instructions if you intend to dispose of equipment with a per unit value over $5,000 or unused equipment supply, with an aggregate value over $5,000. Again, if this does not apply, the grantee should answer no. Equipment with a per unit value of $5,000 or less, or unused supplies with an aggregate fair market value of $5,000 or less may be sold without triggering repayment requirements. The final action is the attest and submit form. The submit button is final, so take your time and make sure everything is correct. Once you hit the submit button, that action will move the process forward and complete your expense report action item. Be mindful again that this is a final action and no additional changes will be possible once you click submit. Grantees should proceed to closeout and completion of the SF425 following approval of the expense report action item, but no later than 120 days after the end of the budget period. The SBA has revised its policy to align with 2 CFR 200-344, so the form is no longer due within 15 days of expending all funds. Form SF425 is a standard federal financial report. Those who receive federal funds are obligated to file this form to report on the use of grant funds. The SF425 is part of the second step in the SVOG award closeout process. The form is submitted digitally in response to the complete closeout SF425 action item. The action item is made available after the expense report action item has been approved. The basis of accounting is the only editable and required field on the SF425 basic information section. In the SF425, applicable fields will be auto-populated based on information previously provided. Grantees should pay specific attention to boxes 10A through 10C as these amounts are pulled from the expense report action item. If a grantee does not spend all funds, the SBA will issue repayment instructions to collect the unspent funds. The grantee must upload evidence in the SF425 action item that any unspent grant funds have been returned to the SBA. Unspent funds will be reflected in Form SF425 as cash on hand. In addition to confirming any remaining cash on hand, if the grantee purchased property with grant funds that have been sold or disposed of, the grantee must upload evidence that the grantee has repaid the applicable federal share of any proceeds for any such property. If there was no remaining cash on hand, nor proceeds from the sale of property that should be repaid to SBA, no document uploads will be required in response to the SF425 action item. Documentation to support disposition and repayment must be provided before proceeding if disposition is confirmed. The final step in the process is submission of the SF425 certification. This action certifies the completeness and accuracy of the information submitted and captures the name, title, signature, and contact information of the authorized certifying official. The following are a few items to consider in completing the SF425 action item. And they include completing, if yes, completes, have you received the SF425 action item? Was repayment of unused funds required? Were property disposition forms completed and uploaded? Are the total fields 10A through 10C correct? And is the SF425 action item complete and accurate? So again, the SBA is creating a checklist to assist in this process that will capture and cover these items to consider as you complete this action item. Now we'll move into the first Q&A session. I guess the first question, will there be any extensions for closeout? And the response, the updated SVOG post-application guidance released on January 22nd, 2022 provides greater clarity on the closeout timeline. Grantees have additional flexibility in preparing for closeout beyond the 15-day document submission window outlined in the Notice of Award addendum. Grantees have the full extent of their budget period, Notice of Award Box 5, as needed to identify eligible expenses and spend the award funds. Plus, if needed, 120 days from the end of the budget period to assemble documentation and initiate closeout with SBA by responding to the Begin Closeout Expense Report action item. If you have any concerns with the timeline, please reach out to your GMS. Second question, as part of the closeout process, do I have to upload copies of checks, invoices, receipts, and bank statements for proof of expenses? All grantees are required to maintain supporting documentation for all expenditures charged to their SVOG award through the record retention period. However, only grantees selected for monitoring will need to submit this documentation to the SBA. Third question, can I reallocate funds in my expense report to other allowable cost categories? Yes, grantees may move costs between allowable cost categories without SBA pre-approval. All grantees will submit an expense report at closeout clearly showing final expenditure totals by allowable cost category. The next item is notification of award closure. As previously stated, upon completion of grantee closeout, SBA will send a letter notifying the grantee that closeout actions are complete and reminding the grantee of document retention requirements. The notification will be sent to the email address on file. Grantees should keep contact information current during the retention period. The letter informs the grantee that the expense report action item and SF425 action item have been approved and that the closeout requirements for the SVOG grant are now complete. Document retention requirements. Grantees are required to maintain employment records for 4 years following the receipt of funds. This is the from date in Form 1222, Box 5, and to maintain all other records documenting compliance and eligibility for the SVOG program for 3 years following the receipt of funds. These retained records should clearly depict how SVOG award funds were spent on eligible and allowable costs. The sum of costs documented should align with the total funds spent as recorded in the closeout process expense report action item and complete closeout SF425 action item. Examples of documents include employment records, contracted services records, personnel costs, equipment and supplies. And for additional examples of the types of documents that may be requested if you're selected for monitoring, please review the video on what to expect during a monitoring event. We'll now move into the second Q&A section. What if my final budget category amounts and my expense report action category amounts don't exactly match? And the response is that's fine. The final budget is a point in time estimate, and cost allocations may need to be adjusted during the process of documenting your actual expenses. Is there a timeline in which the first expense report action items are available? There will only be one final budget, and one final expense report action item. For grantees that received an initial, supplemental, and/or reconsideration disbursement, the final budget reflects one total grant amount. So you don't need to separate out expenses between the initial and final grant amounts. The expense report action item will be sent once your final budget is approved. Note, if you have indicated in your final budget that you have unspent funds, your assigned GMS will reach out and confirm, and repayment instructions will be provided to you prior to the issuance of the expense report action item. Final question. What if an expenditure is denied, but we have other qualified expenses to replace it? Will that be okay? Yes, that would be handled in depth during the monitoring process and auditing process. SBA will work with grantees to identify qualified expenses. That's the end of this session. We'll now move into the information and support section. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Rochelle, so much. So this is Tara again, and I have been in the background reviewing some questions, answering some questions, and there's just a couple that we also wanted to include based on questions that were coming through. So I see a lot of people have been asking if they have to complete their audit before they can close out. And so the short answer is yes. We will not be able to fully close out your grant until all of the requirements have been completed. And that includes the audit requirements and any monitoring requirements. So we do encourage you to submit your expense report. And remember, that is what initiates closeout. So submit that expense report. And if there are any outstanding requirements, such as a monitoring event or outstanding audit documentation, we will review your expense report, but we will not approve it until the other requirements have been met. So you can initiate closeout while those items are being completed, but it will not be finalized. And I see another question. So actually, let's go ahead with the next slide. We have some additional information resources available. So I'll review this. And one is just, we want to reiterate that your grant management specialist contact information is now listed on your grantee portal. So if you have any issues connecting with them, do confirm the contact information there. What they can do is provide basic information related to completing the closeout action items. So they won't be able to specifically coach you or advise you, and specifically what to include for any action item, but they can help explain the parameters and answer any kind of process questions. If you need specific advice as to, allocating cost expenditures to certain budget categories or what documentation to provide in your monitoring event, please do reach out to a legal or a finance professional who is most familiar with your business to make sure that you get quality counsel on that regard. Next slide, please. So the next question that I see came up a lot relates to interest. So there is a stipulation that any interest over $500 needs to be returned. So you can keep your SVOG funds in an interest-bearing account, and you can keep up to $500 of that interest earned within a given year. Anything in excess of $500 needs to be returned. So we have some repayment instructions on our website, and you would return that through the Department of Health and Human Services payment management system. And a quick reminder that limit of $500 does apply on a year basis. If you have any other questions about interest on repayments, we can share this link to CFR 200.305B. And any information or questions that you would need, the payment management system customer support can be reached at 877-614-5533 or PMS support at psc.hhs.gov. Just review and see if we have any other questions coming through. That covers most of the general questions we received. So I just want to highlight some information we have available. Our website, www.sba.gov/SVOGRANT, is a great resource. We have sections for monitoring, we have sections for closeout and audit requirements. All of our webinars, including this webinar, will be posted there. So this webinar recording should be posted early next week. But please do reach out to your grant management specialist if you haven't seen that, and they can connect you with some great resources. So with that, I will turn it back over to Acting Deputy Director Catherine Cox for closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Tara. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Rochelle. And thank you to our nearly 1,000 attendees for your attention. We hope that today has been informative. We are continuing to answer questions in the chat, so please continue putting those in. But as Tara mentioned, your grants management specialist is going to be your best resource. So please do not hesitate to reach out to your GMS should you have any questions about the closeout process or any of our other processes. Thank you all so much for attending, and we look forward to working with you again soon. Have a wonderful day.